Hi, my name's Kevin Hicks. Welcome to the History Squad. Now, today's video is all about a bit of a hero of mine, Mary Seacole. Now, this woman was often defined by her colour. She was born in Kingston, Jamaica, 1805. Her father was a Scottish Army officer in the British Army station there, and her mother was black. Now, this woman, wow, what a fearless traveller. A healer, a businesswoman, and she faced racism, rejection, and enormous obstacles, but she never backed down. This woman refused to be stopped by prejudice, politics, or even war. And today we're going to explore this remarkable lady's story. Mary Seacole. We don't actually know much about her early years. Her father was a Scottish soldier. Her mother was either black or mixed race, a Creole in the Caribbean, in Jamaica. Mary was farmed off to another lady to be raised. Mother was very busy with their store in Jamaica. Most of the information we have about Mary Seacole comes from her own memoirs. She was married off, which is quite interesting, and moves from Kingston away to another town with her, as she describes, weak and sickly husband. They don't make a go of it because he is so ill, so they move back to her mother when her husband dies. So she picks herself up, dusts herself down, and she makes a note in her memoirs that she had many suitors who wanted to be Mr. Seacole. But she refused them because she was helping out with her mother and learning a little bit of a trade that her mother carried out, that of a healer. One of the words I read was she-doctor. She would tender people and help her mother with all of this stuff. And then, lo and behold, mother dies. So Mary Seacole is pretty much on her own. But she had this store that she inherited from her mother. And she traded so much with the British Army in Jamaica, the 47th of Foot and the 96th. She became very, very fond of her clientele, mainly officers, because if you came to her store and you purchased any goods, it was expensive. They were, I suppose, good for the mess table. And also, some of her remedies would help. So if an officer had a wife who was sick, they might bring her down to see Mary Seacole, Mother Seacole as she became known. And then lo and behold, her store burns down and so does her house. And what does this young lady do? She rebuilds it better. And then cholera hits, that terrible disease. And this is before John Snow had discovered how it was spread in London town. Mary Seacole says, we think it came in from a ship from New Orleans. And New Orleans was famous for that terrible disease, cholera. A bundle of soiled linen had been brought into Kingston to be washed. And the washerwoman who washed it contracted cholera. Bang, there's an epidemic. She fights it. This is quite an incredible story for a young Creole woman. Now, she has a brother who is down on the Isthmus of Panama. Now, the Isthmus is that narrow neck of land in Central America. We now call it Panama. The Panama Canal now runs through it, but that's a different story. Now, an isthmus is where you have one landmass is joined to another by a very narrow neck of land. And it was important because if you were coming down the Atlantic coast of the United States into the Gulf of Mexico and you wanted to get across into the Pacific Ocean, you had two choices. You go all the way around South America by ship, very dangerous, or you crossed the isthmus. And the way you crossed it was a short railway journey, mule, and then a canoe trip. Was it described to me as crocodile infested, snakes that bite you, things that sting you. One man was stung and he was so swollen up that even the follicles of his hair bled. So that kind of sums it up, doesn't it? Mary Seacole is going to go through treacherous, dangerous jungle to Cruces, to her brother's independent hotel. But you say independent hotel, wasn't really a hotel. It's a store, a bit of a saloon. You can get food there. You can get fresh linen, all of that kind of stuff. Right in the middle of the jungles of Panama. Panama. When she arrives at her brother's independent hotel, she's in total shock. Now, Mary Seacole travelled all the way from Jamaica by ship with a large amount of stores. So when she arrives on the isthmus, she has to have all of her stores unloaded from the ship, put onto the train. The short journey that the train does, because it doesn't go very far because of the swamps, all has to be unloaded, packed onto a mule train through this treacherous jungle. And then when they reach the river, it's unloaded off the mules onto canoes, and then it's rowed up to the independent hotel at Cruces. When she arrives there and sees the state of the place, she's horrified. Everywhere is built on stilts because it's basically on a swamp. It's disgusting. When she sees her brother's independent hotel, it's a shack. It's filthy. When she's asked, where am I going to sleep? There isn't anywhere to sleep. What about my servants? Because she has a couple of servants with her. No room. So she takes the oilskin cover off the long table in the centre where the guests could eat, climbs underneath the table, and makes room for herself and her two servants. Her brother actually sleeps on the table. This is what she's arrived at. It's not the independent hotel you would think. No, it's a dirty old shack. And she describes Cruces as a wild, lawless place. Soldiers who's supposed to keep the peace have rusty muskets, have no idea how to soldier, let alone fire their muskets. She says the most important piece of furniture is the hammock, because you don't want to put anything on the ground because it will rot away quickly. Not only that, the spiders might bite you. So we have this picture now of Cruces. And what happens? Cholera. Mary now fights hard, trying to nurse people, trying to help. Incidentally, a large number of the people who pass through Cruces are from the United States of America, to be precise, from the southern states. And poor old Mary suffers a tremendous amount of racism from these people. And it's all written down in her memoirs. She doesn't like it. In fact, she doesn't like these southern women, particularly from the United States. Now, there's a little bit of a tide that flows to and from Cruces. People coming up the river, they then go on their onward journey, and then those coming the other way. So there is a profit to be made, and there is a lot of nursing to be done. And Mary is quite perplexed by this cholera, and she decides that she's going to do more now. More supplies are brought down from Jamaica. The store is getting bigger, it's getting cleaner, she adds to it. But her brother suggests that they move, or she moves, to the next town and does the same so they can double their profit. And it's here that she meets more and more of the American travellers. And she does them a lot of good. She tends their wounds because there is gunfights. This is like the worst western town you can imagine. Gunfights, stabbing. And that's when she tells you about the populace in these towns. At the very bottom of the tree, you have the Indian natives. They're the ones who row the canoes, pole the canoes. Then you have the black freed slaves or runaway slaves from the United States. Because what they say is if you arrive on the isthmus, you take off your chains and they stay off. You are free. So it's interesting because many of the hierarchy within these towns were actually ex-slaves who'd run away from the southern United States. The judges, the mayors, they were all black. And the incoming people from New Orleans, the white Americans, they hated this. They didn't like it. And they treated, it was the Americans particularly, who treated the mulers, the guys who brought the mules in, and then the Indians, most abysmally. She says, interestingly, if we had English travellers, they would defend the locals against the prejudice of the Americans. Now, Mary set up quite an establishment in their second location where her food was becoming legendary. Now, one of the rare things to get to eat in the isthmus was chicken and eggs. And in order to keep track of the eggs, she would make sure that they counted the shells. When you have an egg, we put the shell there, and then we can reckon up at the end of it. And one American had a voracious appetite for eggs. And he knew that if he downed half a dozen eggs, he'd be charged quite a large amount of money for those eggs. So what he'd do is he'd crack one, put the peel on the table, and very gently knock some of it on the floor. So when they added up the eggshells, there was only 3 or 4 on the table because he would grind them down. But Mary guessed what this young man was up to, and her servant was under the table. So when it come to the reckoning, he went, 1, 2, 3 eggs. She says, no, you've had 8. No, I haven't. She says, you have. My servant has counted them. They're under your feet. This was the kind of lady that Mary Seacole was. Now understand this. She's in one of the most hostile places on earth. Guns, knives, murder, violence all of the time. She learned how to stitch up a knife wound. She learned about gunshot wounds. This is going to do her good. But one problem she had was she wasn't happy there. In fact, when she decides to leave, the locals and the Americans who'd stayed to try and make a living, because there was gold down there as well. So there's so much to this, isn't there? Yeah, gunslinging, knives, natives, Americans, British travellers, a gold strike. She mentions that she tried her hands at a little bit of gold prospecting, but it was no good. But gold was being brought into these towns, and so there was gambling there as well. So this is like Dodge City in the jungle. But she has enough. When an American at her farewell dinner basically says that it's a shame she's not a citizen of the United States. But there again, she couldn't be, could she? Because of the colour of her skin. But if we could bleach her skin, wouldn't that be so much better? On hearing the American's toast, her brother places his hand on Mary's shoulder, preventing her from exploding. But she makes a reply to the toast, and I've got it written down from her own words here. This is Mary Seacole's reply to those Southern gentlemen. Gentlemen, I return to you my best thanks for your kindness in drinking my health. As for what I have done in Cruces, Providence evidently made me to be useful. And I can't help it, but I must say that I don't altogether appreciate your friend's kind wishes with respect to my complexion. If it had been as dark as any native, I should have been just as happy and as useful and as much respected by those whose respect I value. And as for his offer of bleaching me, I should, even if it were practicable, decline it without any thanks. As to the society which the process might gain me admission into, all I can say is that, judging from the specimens I have met here and elsewhere, I don't think that I shall lose much by being excluded from it. So, gentlemen, I drink to you and the general, I love this little bit, and the general reformation of American manners. Wow, brilliant. So Mary's going to leave the isthmus. She's had enough of it. There was a great flood, the violence, the disease, and the way she was treated by the Americans, especially American ladies. She just did not like it. So she decides she's going to leave. Her brother doesn't want to come. He's going to stay there. He's well entrenched in there. In fact, he'll end his days in the isthmus. But Mary now wants to get home to Jamaica as quickly as she can. So she books passage on an American ship. And they warn her, don't go on board. But she goes on board, sits in the saloon with her servants, one of whom is black. And let's put it this way. The American ladies on board hound her out. So she goes to see the captain. Where am I to sit? And the captain says, look, I'm sorry, Mary. It won't be safe for you on this ship. Here's your money. Look, there's an English ship. It will be sailing soon. Try your passage on that. So she does. And she has a lovely voyage home on board an English ship. It's very sad, isn't it? But this is a time when slavery was still legal in the United States. So, it's before the American Civil War. So you've got to look quite far back and understand what the people were like in those days. But Mary now arrives in Jamaica. She sets herself up. She'll be there for about 8 months. And lo and behold, there is an epidemic. Cholera. Fever. She mentions how she treated it. She also mentions some of the mistakes that she made. In her treatment of patients, in her own words, Mary Seacole says she made lamentable blunders and she lost patients in the early years that later on she wouldn't have done. Some of her treatments involved mustard plasters, emetics where you were induced to vomit, calomel, which is a mercury extract but applied on the outside. She didn't like opium because it put her patients to sleep and then they drifted away. She did admit that each patient was different and you had to treat them different. She also believed that you got to aerate the room, and once the fever had passed, that the cholera was gone, she would continue to treat the patient because what she'd found through her experience was the disease could actually come back quite quickly because the patient was always left in a weakened state. Now, there is controversy about Mary Seacole. I believe it's something to do with modern history. They've bigged her up as this nurse from the Caribbean who went to the Crimea. She never professed to be a nurse, but she did nurse people. And we know the effect that she had because many of her patients in Jamaica were actually from the British Army. They were officers' wives, officers' children very often, as well as being officers. There was one young surgeon who came to her in an advanced state of illness with cholera. And she nursed him till he died. And his mother, way back in England, was so grateful. She sent her a gift of a brooch. There are lots of testimonies about what good Mary Seacole did. But I know she was only in Jamaica for 8 months, and then she finds out about the Crimean War and her beloved redcoats, her beloved British soldiers were out fighting. And when she found out about the deplorable condition, the misfunction of, or the malfunction of the British Army supplies and how her men were in want of food and clothing, she decided she'd got to do something. This thing that runs through her memoirs, she got to make herself useful. She will do that in the Crimea. So the Crimean War, I suppose I ought to explain a little bit about it. 1853 to 1856, October and the March. Just over 2.5 years of sheer hell. Well over 500,000 men lost their lives. This is the whole lot. Now, Russia, the Empire of Russia was coming down from the north. The land was supposed to be held by the Ottoman Turks, who were weakening. So there was allies, the Ottoman Turks, the British, the French, who did quite well in the Crimea, together with the Sardinian people, which I found amazing when I read this. They stood in the way of the Russians. The British, it's a stain on our history, the Crimean War. Not because we were there, because we were fighting, but because the way our troops were treated, it was disgusting. It really was. More of our troops, in fact, on all sides, died of disease rather than being killed by the enemy. In fact, one of the quotes about the French army is they were even worse treated than the British soldiers. Cholera was one of the big killers. It is a sad, sad episode in history, and we are going to plunge our heroine, Mary Seacole, right into the heart of the Crimean War. So Mary's tried to become a nurse. She's offered her services and she's been rejected. She had plenty of experience. Don't forget she dealt with gunshot wounds and all that kind of stuff down in Panama. But interestingly, she won't give up. She's going to go to the Crimea one way or the other. And she actually forms a company with a Mr. Day. to go to the Crimea and open up her store, her British hotel. It's not a hotel where you stay, it's like her brother's place. It's somewhere you can go and have a meal, and you can buy some of the luxuries that you can't get in the front line. So they get together, it's the Seacole and Day Company, and they load up loads of crates with goodies, relish, all that kind of stuff, preserves and nice things, and off they go to the Crimea. Do you know, this lady had so much forethought. She sent business cards out into the Crimea before she'd even arrived. And this is what they said. British Hotel, Mrs. Mary Seacole, late of Kingston, Jamaica, respectfully announces to her former kind friends and to the officers of the Army and Navy generally that she has taken her passage in the screw steamer Hollander to start from London on the 25th of January, intending on her arrival at Balaclava to establish a mess table and comfortable quarters for sick and convalescent officers. This would reach the British Army before she arrived. So her friends from those regiments that she knew back in Jamaica would know that there are going to be stuff that you could buy, place that you could have a meal, place that you could rest. And boy, did the British Army need it. They were in a terrible state. On their journey to the Crimea, their first stop is Gibraltar, just as they enter the Mediterranean Sea there, the Straits of Gibraltar. Here she meets old friends from the 48th of Foot, who she knew over in Kingston, Jamaica. And they warn her about what it's like really in the Crimea. Take fruit, take vegetables, take niceties, yeah, but be careful, it's going to be hard. She then goes on to Malta, that's the next stop, and there she meets more friends, some of them suffering from dysentery, and they warn her about what to expect. But she's given a letter of introduction by a doctor there. She refers to him as Dr. F. Interestingly, in her memoirs, she doesn't give people's names. She says it's private, and she doesn't give her age. I love this. But the doctor's letter of recommendation is to none other than Florence Nightingale, the famous nursing sister Florence Nightingale, who will be at Scutari Hospital just outside Istanbul. So the journey now continues, and when Mary's ship stops at Istanbul, she makes her way to Scutari Hospital to meet Florence Nightingale. Now, Scutari Hospital is over 300 miles from the front line, and those soldiers who are there, they must have been in a terrible state. Florence Nightingale and all her nurses are going to be so busy. But by the time Mary Seacole arrives at the hospital, it's getting late, but she meets a sergeant that she knows who's recovering, and he warns her about what to expect. So she keeps getting these warnings about how bad it is. She walks around the hospital, he shows her around, she adjusts a bandage here and there. She then presents her letter of introduction. The nurse reads it and briskly takes Mary Seacole to see Florence Nightingale. And Florence Nightingale, she's not going to offer Mary a position. All the nursing positions are full apparently. But she says she will give her any help that she can in her endeavour to set up the hotel. Now apparently she stays overnight on a couch in some washer room in Scutari Hospital, where she is eaten alive by fleas. This is the problem out there, isn't it? Rats, fleas, thieves. Now, when they arrive at the harbour in Balaclava in the Crimea, it's absolute chaos. There are ships, yachts, barges, all kinds of craft vying for a berth, and when their ship finally gets a berth, they've got to unload it and the ship's got to go. As they're unloading it, she then realises where she's landed. The Turks and the Greeks who work on the harbour are thieves. She has got to watch her precious cargo. As they are being rowed from the ship to the quayside, something falls in the water. They've lost another crate. Then the ship is ordered out because they need the berth. There's problems. She creates absolute hell and goes to the head of the harbour there, who's a British naval officer, who knows Mary Seacole. Would you believe it? And he orders the ship to hang on, let them get their supplies off. She basically gets all the supplies loaded on the quayside, and she has to sit on the supplies, her and her servants, to stop people stealing. Now, they're going to have to find a location for their British hotel. The British Hotel was set up 2 miles outside of Balaclava at a place called Spring Hill, a desolate place. But Mary Seacole and Mr. Day had a problem. It was going to take 6 weeks for them to get their wagon train and mule train together, get all of their goods up to Spring Hill. While she was at Balaclava, in the morning, she opened up her store. Now, don't forget, Mary Seacole, she needed to make a living, and that's not an excuse. Her idea of her British hotel was to bring comforts to the officers of these various regiments, but it was always at a price, and she doesn't hide that fact. It was an economic adventure for her. Yeah, she was opening up her store. So, Balaclava, in the morning, she would open up her little store, but eventually they make their way to the site, and there's nothing there. They have no means of building, there's no structure, nothing. So they have to scavenge, and they get permission from the British Army to get whatever they can from wood, spars, packing crates, anything they can from the harbour, and then transport it up to Spring Hill to build the British Hotel. And in no time at all, they have 1 room. She opens for business, but the problem she has is thievery. The Turks, some French soldiers as Zouaves. She really does have a problem. But locally, there is a Turkish regiment, and the Pasha there finds out that this lady across the way is actually helping some of his sick soldiers, and also offers comforts, decent food. And he is trying to learn English. So the Pasha comes over to the British Hotel, and straight away he realises she needs a hand. One of the things she's lacking is carpenters. She has a couple of British sailors on loan who will help her as carpenters, but the Pasha sends 2 very good carpenters. And eventually the British Hotel becomes more than 1 room. In fact, it covers several acres at the end of the day, and there will be room for horses, livestock, you name it, you can get it at the British Hotel. In fact, when the Pasha's regiment was moved up the line, he said, "We've taken over an abandoned village. There's everything you will need to build or make better your British hotel." And she sends the letter back. She says, "I can't come over there. I'm so busy, and I haven't got a wagon that would take the load." So he sends things. "I think you might need these. Double glass doors, glass windows with frames." So she set up. Some of the problems that Mary had at the British Hotel were quite severe. One of them was rats. They were constantly fighting the rats. Her cook, a really good chef, he had his finger nibbled by a rat while he was asleep in bed, and he threatened to leave. So Mary, distraught at this because she can't lose her chef, decided she needed a cat. So she went across to the British and said, "I need a cat." And the Coldstream Guards had got a cat, so she borrowed their cat. Another problem was her washerwoman was murdered, and they never found out who did it. So consequently, she had to have somebody to do the laundry back at Balaclava. And it was 2 Greeks came up. "Yes, we'll do all that. We'll turn it all linen, all pressed and all that." And they were never seen again. And Mary lost all of her tablecloths, all of her fine linen. So she had to make do, had to make other arrangements. And then she got a pig. And she advertised, "I've got a pig. There'll be bacon, there'll be sausages." So how's the pig doing, Mary? "Oh, it's doing fine. There it is in his pen. And there's this nice big porker." And the one day she goes to feed it, middle of the day, it's gone. She was furious, but the bed was hot. She speaks to some officers who come in for victuals. They round up other officers, they're in the cavalry, and they charge in all the different directions. And they capture the 2 Greeks and the pig. The two Greeks, they're going to go to jail. But the pig now, they decide they daren't keep it any longer because word's out all around that Mary's got a nice fat pig. So the pig is done to death. It's slaughtered. Sausages, bacon, roast pork. You can imagine the sheer delight of those men who could take part in the feasting in the British hotel. But there's another side to this whole thing. Mary would take victuals to the army. So she would load up a mule with her servant, and off they would go, and they would visit the various lines, getting closer to the front line. And she talks about how she treats different wounds. She says the one that she hated to treat the most was frostbite. And I've seen frostbite, and I can imagine how bad it was. Overlooking Sebastopol, the siege was a hill, and you could often go there to watch the battle if you wanted to, officers' wives, that kind of thing. And Mary would go to them to, offer them goodies to purchase. Don't forget, this woman had to make a living. Somebody says to me, oh yeah, she was only there to make money. But remember, her services as a nurse had been rejected. Yes, she had to make money. It's her livelihood. But she went down from the hill into parts of the battlefield when she saw the wounded. She actually was under fire. At one stage, there was an explosion nearby. She hit the deck, she hit the ground so hard that she dislocated her thumb, and it never healed right. But she talks about how she would adjust the bandages, how she would tend to the wounded. And she became famous amongst the common soldiery, for she was there amongst them. She was suffering the dangers the same as everybody else. There's a piece I've missed. I'm just going to slot it in now. When she was at Balaclava, there was the sick key, where soldiers waiting to be shipped back to the UK would be stacked up. Can you imagine the amount of soldiers who may have come straight from their first aid posts or something? And she says how one soldier was groaning. He'd been blinded, and when she looked, his bandage had dried hard against him. So she loosened it. 4 days she spent amongst those wounded soldiers, giving them comforts, helping them with their injuries. And so much so, one of the doctors there noticed her and thanked her personally. In fact, after the Crimea was all over, there were testimonies given from the greatest of the army and navy commands about what Mary Seacole had done, backing up the legend that she didn't just sell comforts. She went down to the trenches and she was under fire, administering what care and first aid she could do. Yes, she nursed the wounded, but she wasn't a nurse, never professed to be one of Florence Nightingale's nurses. In her memoirs, she talks about the siege of Sevastopol, how many of the British charges failed, how the French were successful. But it's when the Crimea was over, and now the regiments will reform and go home. She has the British Hotel stocked to the ceiling with goods because it was running regularly now. What was she to do? She was going to lose the lot. Out upon that hill, there was nobody to sell it to at Spring Hill. So the local Turks, they stood by. She removes her produce, gets it back down to Balaclava, and sells it at an extreme loss. Nobody wanted to pay the full price. She was so upset by this at one stage that she smashed some of her wine stocks and would rather see it pour into the sea than sell it at such a loss. Her beloved iron stove was stolen away. All of the horses that she had, all of the sheep, all of the goats, the chickens, she lost a lot. And when she left Balaclava, she was actually one of the last to go. She got onto her horse and rode out to the battlefield one last time. And she visited the graves of those men she knew and laid flowers on the mass graves of the soldiery. To me, it speaks volumes. When Mary arrives back in England, goes to London, where she is in trouble. She's got no money. She's lost everything. Her company, Day & Seacole, will be dissolved and declared bankrupt. Mary Seacole is left poor. Now, she had some great testimonies from the great and the good of the land, those in charge of the army, those who she'd helped. And it was those gentlemen who put their hands deep into their pockets. This includes some of her creditors who she became friends with for the rest of her life. And they made a fund, Mary Seacole. She was rescued. To me, that is wow. But just to show how important she was to the soldiery, officers and troopers alike, there was a poem published in the Punch magazine. And I'm going to read you just a short snippet, I suppose, just 3 of the verses of this wonderful little poem. And just to let you know, the epaulets is this part, worsted is the common soldier, gold lace is an officer. So just in case anybody doesn't understand, in KCB, it's what the nobs were awarded, yeah? No store set by the epaulet, be it worsted or gold lace. For KCB or plain Private Smith, she still had one pleasant face. And not alone was her kindness shown to the hale and hungry lot, who drank her grog and ate her prog, and paid their honest shot. The sick and the sorry can tell the story of her nursing and dosing deeds. Regimental MD never worked as she in helping sick man's needs. She was quite something. So Mary Seacole stayed in London. She passed away in 1881 in the May. I'm not going to tell you her age because she never wanted people to know her true age. Do you know, she used to wear the Crimean Medal and a couple of others. She wouldn't have been awarded them, but perhaps she was given them, or somebody says, hey, you should wear these to show people where you served. But her grave at St Mary's Catholic Cemetery in Kensal Green can clearly be seen. It's been restored, which I think is fantastic. And if you go there, especially if you're an old squatty like me, give her a smile, maybe a wink, because I'm sure old Mary, Mother Seacole, would appreciate that. Well, I hope you enjoyed that little video of ours to hero Mary Seacole. What a lady. If you did enjoy it, like, share and subscribe. And if you'd like to support the channel further, why not have a look at joining our Patreon community? The link is in the description. Now, before I go, I'd like to give a quick shout out to some of our Patreon members. Here we go. David Lindberg, Andrew Kroner and Torchbug115. Hey guys, thanks a million. Bye for now.